Welcome back. In this installment, we're going to be going over how to set up OpenTelemetry and Jaeger in our project so that we could have more observability on our worker. Now that we have the project up and running, let's head over to the Jaeger website and check out how to set that up. Looks like there's a prerequisite just to install the cert manager as well. So cert manager is just a way of managing certificates in Kubernetes. So we're going to check that out real quick, and feel free to read about that on your own a little bit more. Installing the operator is as simple as just copying and pasting in that command like we've been doing for the rest of the operators. It's going to install. Yeah, be careful of that little dollar sign on the copy there. Once it goes in, it'll install, and then we can go back to the Jaeger website and install the operator for Jaeger. Similar, but the only difference here is that we're going to create a namespace called observability as they've prescribed here, and then also go in and add in the actual operator itself. So paste that in, boom, it's going to run, cool, and now we're good to go. Next, we're going to want to go and get our deployment configuration for Kubernetes for Jaeger. So we just scroll down and they have a little quick start one that has like a very bare bones configuration. So we're just going to go in here just like we have before and then add in that deployment. So we're going to create a new folder here called observability just to keep everything sort of organized and easy. In there, we'll just create a Jaeger deployment file, which will just have that really simple configuration that we saw previously on their website. So we'll copy and paste it in there. But instead of calling it simplest, we'll just call it Jaeger because it'll just be easier for us to understand what's going on here and the context will remain the same. Now that we have that, we're going to go over to our tilt file and we're just going to add it just as we've been doing all the other resources in Kubernetes. So, all right, so right under our worker ping deployment, we'll just add in our deployment for the Jaeger operator here so we can get the deployment out there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing for a resource just like we normally do. We define it so that it shows up appropriately with inside tilt. So nothing new here, just kind of filling out what we need to do here to make this work. And we're going to give it a label of observability. It looks like we're getting some errors. I think I just need to fix labels. Label needs to be labels, and we're good to go now. All right, now we're going to wire up OpenTelemetry. The first thing we're going to do is go check out the Jaeger website. This comes with Jaeger when we install the operator. Right now, we're just seeing the default traces coming through listed under the Jaeger query service. Once we set this up for our worker, we'll be seeing traces come through for our worker. All right, so now we're going to go back over to the OpenTelemetry website and just check out what we got going on. In here, they have a bunch of core examples for pretty much every popular language. So we're just going to go to their main official examples in their GitHub repository and use what they have as a guide to help us get hooked up to sending those traces over to our Jaeger service. This is an example. They have a tracing JS. We're going to augment this to work in our project. So it's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll be pretty close. The first thing we're going to do here is just create a tracing file. So we're going to keep things a little bit separate by putting all of our logic that we need to like hook up the tracer in this particular file, and then we'll be importing it into our index for our worker, which will just essentially turn it on. So the first thing we're going to need to do is just, like in their example, import a bunch of the required imports that we need. And then once we have all those, we'll write out some of our code. I'm also using GitHub Copilot, so sometimes it like randomly jams stuff in there that doesn't even make any sense. It's got its pros and cons, but I leave it enabled just because I'm curious to see what it'll give me. Sometimes it gets frustrating, but in this case, it's kind of helping sometimes. All right, so now that we have our imports, we're going to just set a logger to like log a little everything just so we can see everything that's going on. Probably wouldn't want to do this outside of development, but this is just a quick, easy way to kind of see all the stuff that's happening as we develop to make things easier for debugging purposes. We're now going to create our OpenTelemetry trace exporter. This is going to allow us to export our traces, and then we're going to be updating the URL to our Jaeger instance. You can do this over HTTP. You can do this over, I think, gRPC, but This is just the HTTP way of doing it. So now that we have this configured here, put a little comments in there. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the dashboard in Renter Desktop and just kind of review what we're doing and make sure that the ports and everything line up to what we're looking at for our Jaeger service. This is a good way to just kind of like double check what you're doing makes sense. So we kind of go through everything, try to hunt down where that service is. And then once we're there, we're going to just match the ports up. All right, we found it. There's the services for that. And then as you can see, we can go and we can see that there's the ports right there for it. All right, now that we made sure that everything matched up, we're just gonna start adding some more code. So we're gonna add some providers. The first one that we're gonna add using the basic tracer provider is just using, well, first we're gonna define the name using by defining a resource of worker. And then once we define that, then we're going to go in and add to those providers uh, some span processors. So the first one will be using a simple span process using that exporter that we've defined above that'll shoot out stuff to Jaeger. The next one will just be so that we're pushing out console logs with the span exporter information in it. So we can just make sure that whatever is going in the console logs is lining up to whatever that we're pushing to Jaeger. And then we just register that provider, which turns it on. So now in our worker, we're just going to import that file. That's going to allow us to just turn it on. And then once we have that, we're going to also import trace from the OpenTelemetry API so that we can start setting up our traces. Yeah. We're also going to have to import the packages that we need to make this all work. So let's just do that real quick. Again, you can reference what's in GitHub for this. All right, and now that we have our packages imported and everything is lined up in our package JSON, we can actually add the tracer code to the worker. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so now we're going to add the actual tracing code. So we're going to go into our worker ping execution function, which makes the most sense for doing what we need to do here. We're going to get a tracer by defining a tracer name of worker. Once we have that, we're going to start an active span, and we're going to give that span the name worker ping because that's what this is doing. From there, we're going to go in and we're going to add in additional attributes that we want our worker to send out when a trace is sent. So we'll send out the ping message, maybe add an event, and then we have our logger. But I think we don't really need events. Let's just keep it simple and just add a couple more attributes just because that'll probably be more valuable in our trace for right now. The first one that we can add is, let's see, maybe like the actual worker type. So the worker name, which is an environment variable. And the next one we could probably add that would be good would be the host name, which is the pod DNS name. So we would know which pod is running which worker process, which could be super helpful with trying to figure out where the trace is actually running. And then we're just going to do a span end after that logger info to say this is the end of the span, this is the end of this unit of work, and this is the trace that's going to be sent out. Looks like we have some errors around the span parameter of that function. That's probably because TypeScript is not being able to infer it. OpenTelemetry is not spelled correctly, so we just need to update the spelling for that, and now it's able to properly infer it. As far as the host name, I think we just need to go into the turbo repo JSON and just update that because it has a list of environment variables that you want, and it's not working. So let's just close it and reopen the file. Sometimes that'll just fix it. Yeah, there we go. So now we can test this thing out. So we're going to go hit our API endpoint and then see if we can kick off some queue messages to run. I don't see any traces in here. It just looks like the Jaeger query one. So let's go look at our logs after we spam this a few more times. It looks like there's an error with the tracing import. That is because I spelled it incorrectly. It's tracer, not tracing. So let's just update that and that should resolve that issue. Looks like we still have some import issues. So I'm gonna copy and paste from a working example. It looks like that's spelled incorrectly too for the OLTP tracer. It's actually OTLP tracer. So it looks like we're good to go there. Now we're going to do a little bit more troubleshooting fun because there are some more mistakes here. The source code has everything working, but I find that it's sometimes good to go through the mistakes as so we can kind of learn how this all works as we're doing these examples instead of hiding it and just making it all a happy path tutorial. Um, yeah, so let's add in the missing import here. Just make sure that that's imported and the SDK trace base and is resolved. And once that's loaded in, let's go try and do our trace again. All right, so let's go to our API, run it, and let's get some more logs to see if we're still having that issue now that we've updated all the imports in the package JSON. It looks like we're still having that issue. I may have to just manually cycle the pod using tilt here, that little refresh button, but let's see what else we got going on. I guess the first thing we can do is just also make sure that everything's connected correctly. It looks like the Jaeger endpoint wasn't actually named correctly for the service. It's Jaeger dash collector, not just Jaeger. And then I think what we're going to need to do is refresh the pod here just so that we can get the latest configuration because it looks like the npm packages weren't actually resolving correctly. So let's see what happens here. I sped it up a little bit just to speed up the build process. It looks like we're good. There's one more error that we need to fix, and it looks like the endpoint for the traces is incorrect. It doesn't like having that extra slash there, I think. So let's try it. Let's kick off some more API endpoint calls. It looks like they all ran with no errors. So let's go check out, now that we can kind of see in here what the output looks like for the exporter. Let's go check out actually in Jaeger if those traces are there. And if we refresh, we can see that the worker service is there. We can find those traces that we put in there. If we open it up and we go into tags, we can see the values that we wanted to add in there. It looks like the worker name and the host name are not set correctly, so let's just go see why. Yeah, so I used an incorrect operator here. We don't actually want to do what it was doing. We just want to get the actual values. In order to make TypeScript happy, we're just going to put these in two if blocks just because all it's really saying is it can't validate that those values will have a value in them. So it's sort of safeguarding us, one of the values of TypeScript. So we're just going to put both of these and check if they exist first in two if statements, and that's going to resolve this error, get us what we want. It's not as like elegant looking as maybe some of the shorter operator options, but it's very clear when it says verbose to know what's going on versus some fancy operator magic within TypeScript. All right, so we're going to send some more API endpoints here just to get some more data, and then we'll go check the Jaeger website to make sure that everything is working correctly as expected. All right, so now that we're back into our Jaeger UI, let's go find one of the more newer traces. So we can just do that by just going find traces, and it'll just pull up the latest ones. All right, now that we have one that just happened a few seconds ago, we're going to open it up and we're going to make sure that the host name is correct and the worker name is correct, and they are. All right, and early in the video, we kind of toned down how many worker messages are being sent. So we're going to up it to like 100 so we can see what that output looks like in the console, and then also maybe check it out in the Jaeger UI as well. And then we'll put in the message number here in the loop so that we can kind of have some uniqueness to the messages. That'll be helpful when we're looking through the traces just to sort of see, um, what that looks like. So they're not all the same. All right, so we're good to go there. So let's save this and fire up the API again real quick and just get the messages sent over. All right. Now we'll see a bunch of messages stream through. There's going to be a very verbose amount of information here with all the different traces and requests and everything going on. So I'm just going to scroll around and kind of just show you, everyone that there's different message names. We have the host name in there. Uh, there could be potentially different host names so that we can identify which trace belongs to which pod for additional troubleshooting to see if there's like any other issues, gives us a little more observability. So this is a pretty valuable way of figuring out stuff in a distributed model where you're worker processes could be on multiple pods, and you wouldn't be able to really just debug it with a debugger locally. And then, we'll probably dive a little bit more into OpenTelemetry and Jaeger and maybe some other videos just to show how this could be valuable. But for now, this is just getting it working and showing an easy way to just sort of get additional observability in your development environment and potentially your production environment, because this is a you know another way of doing something open source instead of using something like Datadog or New Relic to manage your logging. So here are all those traces again that just happened. We can pop into them and go and look and see the tags that are in them and see the different values. So this one has the worker number and the loop there, and you could put in a bunch of different stuff here, but this is just an example of just what's possible. All right, well that's it. In this video, we installed Jaeger using the Kubernetes operator they provide. We also installed one of the dependencies for Jaeger, which is Cert Manager, using their operator as well. We then took a look at OpenTelemetry, looked at one of their examples, pulled in their SDK, and then used that to send traces from our worker to Jaeger so that we could have a little bit more observability for our worker. This is really important because our worker currently has the ability to scale. And unlike our web app, which we don't have really any scaling set up, we could just debug a single node. But our worker is kind of built to scale and process queue messages horizontally. So it's not as easy to just like debug a single worker because we're going to miss some of those messages if we're truly trying to debug everything. So having something like Jaeger set up and being able to send traces and logs to a central place that you can have additional observability around what your worker is doing provide us a little bit more insight into how we can troubleshoot and kind of just see how things are working within the services that we write.